Hello, dear friends of Snail Story. Have you ever imagined that a simple skydive meant for fun could be the beginning of an entirely new life? A CEO, Ethan Walker, falls from the sky and lands in a forest untouched by any map. There, he is saved by a mysterious woman, Isabella Moore, who lives hidden deep within the wilderness, carrying a secret powerful enough to bring down a billion-dollar corporation. And love blooms, not in diamond rings or grand confessions, but in bowls of herbal medicine, nights by the fire, and in a quiet line: "If you truly believe in me, don't just come back for me, come back for justice." Today's story, Light in the Deep. Forest is a journey not just about justice, but about trust, about coming home and a kind of love that doesn't need a name. If you love stories that are slow, emotional, and layered with meaning, don't forget to hit like to support the Snail Story team and subscribe so you won't miss more of these tender, thoughtful life tales. And now, let's step into the forest. The small aircraft soared through the sky like a proud iron bird. The morning sunlight gilded the drifting clouds, making them look like giant balls of cotton candy. Ethan Walker tightened his parachute straps and nodded at the woman standing across from him, Scarlett Dawson, daughter of Gentera's chairman and soon-to-be his fiancée. Scarlett beamed, raising her slender hands to form a heart. "The final challenge before our engagement, Mr. CEO," she teased. Ethan chuckled, his pale gray eyes gleaming with excitement. He was the adventurous type. He'd dived in the Maldives, ridden horses across Patagonia, and now he was skydiving. Over the Amazon rainforest, the signal blared. The door opened. A gust of wind howled in. The jump team moved in sequence, one by one, diving out like vibrant specks against the vast sky. Ethan was third. He drew in a deep breath, stepped out of the plane, and fell. The first sensation was pure freedom. Ethan laughed into the thin air, the sun lighting up his tousled brown hair. Less than 10 seconds later, something felt wrong. A sudden gust yanked his parachute sharply to the left. His main chute veered off course. Then a snap. One of the cords had torn loose. "Damn it," Ethan muttered, fumbling to deploy the reserve chute. But the freak wind lashed him like a slap from Mother Nature, driving him further away from the planned drop zone. Below him, the treetops twisted together into an endless green labyrinth, a jungle not marked on any jump map. Ethan crashed into the forest. He woke when the sky had turned amber. The first sounds weren't rescue sirens, but birds calling to their flocks and water trickling nearby. The scent of damp earth filled his nose. One shoulder throbbed with pain. A long gash split his jumpsuit sleeve, stained crimson with blood. "Where am I?" he murmured, struggling to sit up. Around him was nothing but trees and tangled vines. No phone signal, no compass, no sign of another soul. He had no idea how long he walked. Every step came with a gasp. Jungle mosquitoes feasted on his wrists. Just as his knees nearly buckled, he spotted a thin wisp of smoke in the distance. Like a silent promise, the girl appeared without warning, in a space that seemed carved from some surreal dream. A hut stood beneath massive leaves. A pot hung over glowing embers. And then Isabella Moore stepped out from the shadows. She wore a coarse linen shirt, her hair tied back, her sun-darkened face sharp and arresting. Her deep brown eyes locked onto his, not startled, not frightened, simply observing. "You one of them?" she asked, her voice low and slow. Ethan didn't understand. He collapsed to the ground, panting. "I got lost. Skydiving fell. I don't know where this is." Isabella said nothing. She stepped forward, examined his wound, cleaned it with something fragrant and herbal, then wrapped it in soft cloth strips. Her hands were swift and sure, like someone who had done this many times before. Then she handed him a bowl of water, cold and clear. Ethan tilted it back and drank deeply. A moment later, darkness claimed him. He woke at night, inside a small hut made of bamboo and palm leaves. The faint scent of charcoal smoke lingered in the air. On the wooden walls, firelight from the hearth flickered in ghostly patterns. His arm had been bandaged, his torn shirt replaced with rough cloth. He shifted slightly, groaning. A figure by the fire turned her head toward him. It was the girl from earlier, Isabella. She said nothing, still and quiet like the forest itself, her face unreadable. Ethan meant to thank her, but something in her gaze made him hesitate. There was no hostility, but no warmth either, only guardedness. "You saved me," Ethan finally rasped. "Thank you." Isabella gave a faint nod, didn't reply. She stood, walked to a small water jar in the corner, and ladled out a scoop. Placing it near his bed, she didn't touch him, didn't glance back. "You should rest. Nights here are cold and unsafe." Her voice was low, firm, and each word seemed carefully chosen. Ethan wanted to ask so many things: where he was, why she lived here alone, whether there was a way out. But something about her demeanor told him she wasn't quick to trust. Or maybe she had been betrayed too many times. He closed his eyes, letting the rustling forest and the whir of insects become a wild lullaby. Nearby, the woman remained seated, a carved wooden knife in her hand, her gaze fixed on the fire, in the heart of the jungle, inside a strange little hut. Ethan Walker, a CEO used $2 billion boardrooms, had never felt so small, so powerless. But deep inside, he knew, this woman, nameless, silent, withholding, might just hold the key to something far greater than either of them could imagine, even if she had no idea who he was. Morning sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting golden shafts across the thin stream of smoke rising from the rough thatched roof of the hut. Ethan awoke for the second time in a single day. His mind lighter, but his body still leaden, as if all his strength had been drained. His right arm was neatly wrapped in bandages made from tree bark, carrying the faint scent of herbs and sap. Outside, the murmuring of the forest echoed like a ceaseless lullaby, not loud but relentless, a reminder that this place belonged to no map, and certainly not to the world of suits, financial reports, and first-class flights. Isabella was kneeling by a small fire, sweat glistening on her sun-tanned cheekbones. She stirred a pot of ivory-colored porridge with a wooden stick, the smell unfamiliar but soothing. Beside her sat a local child, about 8 years old, with jet-black hair and wide, round eyes. The child stared at Ethan with fascination, as if a strange creature had fallen from the sky. Ethan shifted slightly, making a small sound. Isabella turned immediately, her gaze sharp as a blade. "You should stay still. Your shoulder hasn't healed." Her voice was low and husky, carrying the bluntness of someone used to silence. There was no smile, no soft concern. The kind women in the city might offer a wounded man. Only vigilance. Ethan nodded, propping himself up slowly, eyes fixed on her face. "Are you a doctor?" he asked, trying to break the strange distance between them. She didn't look up. "I learned from the locals, and from mistakes." Vague answer. Ethan realized every question here had to pass through a fog before reaching the truth. "Thank you for saving me," he said, sincerely. She glanced at him for a second. No clear reaction. But at least this time, she didn't leave the hut. That afternoon, Ethan was allowed to go outside for air, on the condition that he'd not stray too far from the hut. The jungle air was thick and damp, the scent of plants rushing to his brain and making him momentarily dizzy. But then he saw what lay before him, and it felt as though he'd stepped into another world. A small encampment nestled deep in the rainforest, with only 4 or 5 huts made of palm leaves and bamboo. Naked children ran laughing with shaggy dogs. Women carried water from a nearby stream, while men smoked meat over open fires. They all looked at him with quiet eyes, not hostile, but not curious either. As if his presence was nothing more than a wisp of smoke destined to vanish, Isabella stayed close, never more than a step away. Ethan glanced at her and, for the first time, noticed the calluses on her hands, the tiny scars that looked as though they'd been stitched with handmade thread. She was strong, not the kind of strength built in gyms, but the hardened resilience of someone who had survived too many days with no choice but to endure. "What's your name?" she asked as they rested on a mossy stone. "Ethan, Ethan. Walker." She nodded slightly. "Isabella. Isabella." More. Ethan raised an eyebrow. The name rang a bell. But at this moment, his mind couldn't connect it to anything specific. Maybe just coincidence. "How long have you lived?" "Here, long enough to stop counting." "And the others?" "We don't ask each other questions like that here." Once again, the door closed just as it cracked open. Isabella spoke as if her hand was always on the trigger, never letting anyone get too close. Each answer was a cage, keeping the truth safe in the shadows. Ethan stayed silent, watching the children play with a small monkey. He thought of Scarlett, of the plane, of the life he had been flung from. Then he looked back at the girl beside him, the one who had kept him alive with forest herbs and scarred hands. "You don't trust people from the city, do you?" he asked softly. Isabella looked up. This time, she held his gaze for several seconds. Her dark brown eyes shimmered with something difficult to name. Not anger, not fear, but a weariness that had fermented into caution. People from the city don't come here without a reason, and that reason is rarely a kind one. Ethan didn't reply, but deep down he knew something in her past had turned that belief into an unyielding truth. A fortress she had built too high, for too long, and he, a CEO who fell from the sky, had unknowingly become the man standing at its gate, unaware that behind it was a secret that could change both their lives forever. Day 3 in the jungle. Ethan had begun to adapt to the rhythm of life in the small camp. Each morning, Isabella handed him a bowl of bitter liquid to thin the blood and keep the wound from festering. She said, Kay didn't ask questions, he'd come to understand that questions were a luxury here. But even without asking, he watched and remembered. Isabella never lied, but she always left something out. One morning, waking earlier than usual, Ethan saw her seated beside a pile of herbs, grinding them down with 2 smooth stones. Her sleeves were rolled up to her elbows, revealing a long scar running down her forearm, fine but deep, as if made by a scalpel. Ethan frowned. That wasn't a hunter's scar. It was too precise, too surgical. "You really were a doctor, weren't you?" he asked, suspicion unconcealed. Isabella didn't answer. She simply tore a strip of cloth, dipped it into the herbal paste, and handed it to him as if the question had never been asked. "Put this on your shoulder. I'll check it again this evening." Ethan took the cloth, said nothing. But in his mind, a slow storm of memory and intuition began to stir. That afternoon, the jungle wept. A steady, cold rain drenched the trees. Ethan offered to help tend the fire, if only to feel less like a burden. Isabella reluctantly agreed, though she watched his every move with unblinking eyes. While searching for dry wood in the supply hut, Ethan accidentally bumped into a small wooden chest tucked beneath a thick cloth. It wasn't locked, but wrapped in a tied fabric. His instincts led him to open it. Inside was a bundle of old documents wrapped in a weatherproof leather sleeve. Nothing but printed sheets, molecular diagrams, chemical formulas, gene maps, and pages of research notes. He scanned them only briefly, and immediately knew this was high-level biotech research. Far beyond herbal remedies. This was modern. Biotechnology, the kind used by companies like Gentera. Ethan held his breath. He picked up a note. At the bottom was a marking, more-I.lab, Project Sierra 2 clearance level. 4 more I.lab. Project Sierra clicked. 3 years ago. When Gentera announced it had acquired a lab working on neural tissue regeneration using plant-based proteins. The lab's name also began with M. The project was shut down shortly after. Rumor had it the lead scientist died in an accident on site. There was no doubt left. Isabella Moore wasn't just a jungle dweller. She had once been a brilliant researcher. And now she was in hiding. When Isabella returned, Ethan was seated by the hut entrance, the folder in his lap, his eyes unshielded. "You're Isabella Moore, lead researcher on Project Sierra at Gentera. You don't just know plants, you led a Level 4 biotech lab." The jungle wind tugged at the tarp flap, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and rain-drenched leaves. Isabella stood still, unmoving. But her eyes had never been colder. "You went through my things." Ethan swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to, but if I'm right, someone wanted you to disappear. And I need to know what happened." Isabella sat across from him, but just far enough to reach for a knife if needed. Her face no longer wore masks. What remained was a raw, cutting clarity. "Yes, I was that person. But you won't understand, and you shouldn't. This isn't a story for a man who got lost. And if I'm not just a man who got lost..." Isabella's brows drew together. Ethan pulled a worn leather wallet from his torn pack and opened it to reveal a small metal ID. Strategic shareholder Gentera Holdings. Ethan Walker, silence. Then a short, bitter laugh. "The world really is small, and I was a fool to save you." She stood, took the documents from his hands, rewrapped them in leather, and returned them to their hiding place. "You should go, before others find you. And this time, I won't be the one pulling you out." She left him with a gaze that burned. Not with anger, but with the fire of someone who had survived the darkness and had no intention of ever looking back. Ethan sat there for a long time, surrounded by the hiss of rain and the hum of insects. A new question weighing heavy on his chest. What do you do when the person the world tried to erase is the one your world was built to destroy? After that night, the air between Ethan and Isabella stretched thin like the string of a violin. One wrong touch, and it would snap. Isabella said nothing more about the past. She no longer prepared his meals, no longer handed him medicine each morning. But she didn't drive him away either. She didn't abandon his wound to rot. She still dressed it, still reminded him to be careful. Everything became duty. Ethan understood. Trust was something that had once been taken from her, brutally, so he stopped pressing for answers. Instead, he learned to live like a regular person in that little camp. He helped the local children gather wood, learned to start fires without a lighter, and even how to cook the jungle porridge Isabella had given him that first day. Every time he clumsily dropped a knife or spilled water, Isabella gave him a look that blended frustration with a quiet, almost hidden smile. Somehow, the silence between them had changed. It no longer felt heavy. It had become something gentle. One morning, the sky was crystal clear. Dew clung to banana leaves, sparkling in the early sun. Ethan had just woken when he saw Isabella standing at the edge of the forest, holding a wooden bough, a canvas satchel slung over her shoulder. "Where are you going?" he asked. "For medicine. An old man in the village's been coughing all night. Let me come with you." She paused. For the first time in days, she looked directly at him. No suspicion, no refusal. Just a quiet nod. "Don't make noise." They walked through the dense jungle, where light barely trickled through the thick canopy. No words passed between them, only the crunch of leaves beneath their feet and the distant calls of birds. Isabella walked ahead, fluid and sure, as a wildcat. Ethan followed, trying not to step on anthills or slip on mossy stones. After nearly an hour, they reached a narrow stream. Isabella crouched, plucking branches, turning over stones, digging out roots with the care of someone diffusing a bomb. Ethan sat nearby, watching in silence. His eyes traced her every move, sun-tanned hands, small scars, and an expression of unwavering focus. "You know," he said, voice soft as falling leaves, "you look different when you work." She didn't look up. Different how? Then? "You're not afraid, not guarded. It's like you're fully yourself." Silence. Then, after a while, Isabella stopped, a root still clutched in her hand, and whispered, "Because this is the only part of me they couldn't take." Ethan said nothing. There were no better words, but he understood that was the first time. She had mentioned them, the ones who had driven her into hiding. That afternoon, on their way back, the sky broke open. Rain poured like a curtain, sudden and unforgiving. Jungle rain wasn't like city rain. It came down in sheets, heavy and wild. They took shelter in a stone hollow by a slope, water gushing through the crevices, drenching them both. Isabella shivered. No matter how strong she was, her body was still human, and the damp cold seeped to the bone. Ethan took off his outer shirt and draped it over her shoulders. She stiffened, almost refused, but then silently accepted it. His warmth seeped into her skin. "Ethan," she said quietly, "yeah. Have you ever been in love?" The question sliced through the rain like an arrow. He turned to her. "Yes. A woman I once thought was beautiful in every way. But the closer I got, the more I saw that beauty was just a shell hiding something I didn't dare name." Isabella gave a faint smile. "I once loved an ideal, a world where talent and truth were enough. Now I know that world doesn't exist." Ethan didn't speak. He only took her hand for the first time. Her hand was cold, but she didn't pull away. And in that moment, beneath the relentless jungle rain, they found something shared. A familiar emptiness, once shattered, now quietly stitched together by the presence of another. That night, after the storm had passed and the fire flickered once more in the hut, Ethan rummaged through his pack and pulled out a small necklace made of simple leather cord. The pendant was a smooth piece of dark green-blue agate, glowing faintly in the firelight. It wasn't expensive, but it had clearly been with him for years. "This," he said, turning the stone between his fingers, "is my good luck charm. I always carry it when I travel far or when I have to make a big decision." Isabella looked at him, silent. This time might didn't stop the fall. He smiled softly. "But it led me to you, and I think it belongs with the one who saved me." He reached out, placing the necklace on the woven mat beside her. No pressure, no plea. Just a quiet offering of thanks. Isabella looked at it for a long time, as if weighing something far greater than the gift itself. Finally, she picked it up and gave a faint nod. "I'll keep it." Between them, the fire crackled. The wood hissed. Softly, the silence that settled was no longer cold. Ethan didn't try to fill it. Isabella didn't try to escape it. They sat there for a long while, like two wanderers who had found a temporary anchor in a world too vast to understand. They didn't speak of love, no lingering touches. But that night, Isabella no longer locked the hut door when Ethan slept. She began to ask him small questions about the outside world, electric planes, high-speed internet. And Ethan, no longer hesitant, learned to weave. Leaves, pitch tents, and sat quietly as she taught him the names of herbs growing by the stream. Trust no longer impossible, and deep in the forest. Sometimes that was enough for something to bloom, quietly without a name, but real. One evening, as the sun hovered like a streak of orange between the treetops, the boy named Kino returned from the village, holding a backpack with one torn strap. "Oh, we found this near the rocks where you fell," Kino said, placing it in front of Ethan. There were some papers inside. Ethan wiped his hands on his pants and unzipped the bag. Inside were a few remnants of the crash, a GPS with a shattered screen, a notebook soaked and smudged beyond recognition, and a wrinkled envelope, still sealed with the Gentera insignia. He opened it and pulled out a crumpled sheet with bold letters at the top. Extraordinary Shareholder Meeting. Proposal to reassign inactive equity. Date 17:10 a.m. Ethan frowned. Ah, this was the meeting invite I hadn't had a chance to read. I had it on my calendar, but the fall threw everything off. Isabella, seated by the fire, looked up, her gaze fixed on the paper in his hand, as if a final puzzle piece had just clicked into place. "That meeting," she said slowly, "is to make official the removal of my name from Gentera's shareholder board." Ethan froze. "What do you mean?" Isabella stood, walking toward him. Her voice wasn't loud, but each word rang like forged steel. 3 years ago, I was the youngest shareholder appointed to the board after founding Project Sierra. I owned 12%, the largest share outside the Dawson family. She paused, as if to ensure Ethan was truly listening. He nodded. "They said Project Sierra failed, due to safety concerns. That I was reckless, too aggressive with the timeline. But the truth is, I discovered gene samples had been altered. They were conducting unauthorized human trials before the project was ready." Ethan's breath caught. "And you reported it?" "I submitted an internal complaint." 3 days later, an accident occurred in the lab. I survived because I'd left early. My colleague didn't. Her voice dropped. No more steel. Just ash. The next day, I was suspended. My accounts frozen. My records erased from the system. And I got a warning. If I didn't disappear, there would be a second accident. I understood. I had to vanish. Ethan clenched the paper. His hand trembled. They knew I was the only obstacle left to controlling the future of pharmaceutical equity. But legally, they had to wait 3 years of no contact to declare a shareholder missing without cause. This meeting is the final step to reallocate my shares, to erase me forever. Ethan looked at her. His eyes no longer questioned. They carried the weight of someone who had unknowingly stood on the wrong side of something terrible. "I'm one of the shareholders granted voting rights," he murmured. "But I was never told the truth. They only said the project failed due to risk factors. I invested remotely. I wasn't involved in operations, ... And that," Isabella said evenly, "made you perfect for them. Absent, silent, convenient." The silence between them stretched, broken only by the crackle of firewood. Ethan rose. His eyes now held a direction. "I'm going back. I have to be at that meeting." Isabella didn't stop him. She only looked at him for a long time, then spoke, her voice lower, but clear. "If you truly believe in me, don't just go back. For me, go back for justice." Ethan didn't reply, but the way he nodded carried the weight of a vow. He left the forest at dawn, when the air was still heavy with mist. The villagers led him through a rarely used trail, steep, winding, gnarled with roots like skeletal hands reaching from the earth. They didn't escort him to the very end, only said, "Climb 3 ridges. Cross the broken bridge, you'll reach the nearest settlement." Ethan walked nearly 4 hours without stopping. Sweat soaked his shirt, his legs burned with each step, but his eyes grew brighter the further he went. Because up ahead, past the veil of vines and branches, he saw it, corrugated roofs and power poles, the first signs of civilization. The small settlement nestled at the jungle's edge, just a few dozen homes. but it had a worn medical outpost and an old wall-mounted telephone. An elderly woman gave him water and a cloth to wipe. His face then pointed at the phone. "Still works, but you'll have to crank it hard." Ethan picked up the receiver, his palms slick with sweat. He dialed the emergency number and verified his identity. An hour later, rescue confirmed Ethan Walker was alive. They had thought he was dead. Scarlett, his girlfriend, had already held a small memorial at her private estate. The media hadn't been informed yet, but Gentera's board had already braced for a share reallocation due to unexplained disappearance. Ethan wasted no time. "Take me to Gentera headquarters." Immediately. Ethan sat alone in the 27th floor office of Gentera's headquarters. The soft yellow light cast his shadow across the polished wooden floor. Before him lay the current shareholder distribution map, every small square a person, a piece of power, a corner of darkness. The shareholder meeting had been postponed. The files had been sent to federal investigators. The media hadn't caught wind of it yet, but Ethan knew it was only a matter of time. Logan Dawson wouldn't sit quietly. He rested his hand on the desk and closed his eyes. The first image that surfaced wasn't a chart nor a spreadsheet, but a sun-browned face, hair tied back and eyes deep as the rainforest. Isabella. There was no way to reach her. No signal, no phone, no address. Only memory and a silent promise. Since leaving the jungle, Ethan had dreamed of her every night. In his dreams, she stood by the stream, holding a basket of leaves, eyes fixed on him as if asking, "Did you keep your word?" The next day, Ethan called a private meeting. Just 3 people. First, his personal lawyer, Connie Hale Sharp, as Steele, and with a track record of winning cases against 3 major pharmaceutical corporations. Second, Marcus Kwan, an independent investor forced to sell his shares under pressure from Logan 5 years ago. Marcus had stayed silent, but Ethan knew the anger of someone once crushed only needs one reason to rise again. Third, Carla Jennings, a veteran investigative journalist from White Ailey who had once exposed human gene trials in an African test. Zone an article that wiped $8 billion off a Gentera subsidiary's value. "We're not just taking down Logan," Ethan said. "We're exposing the system that protected him. But timing is everything. I want the public to know before Logan regains control of the narrative." Carla leaned back, twirling her pen. "You've got a living witness. That's your ace." "She's somewhere no one can reach," Ethan replied. "And I won't let anyone find her, not until this is over." The campaign began. Not with bullets, but with files, emails, and digital copies of Seralab data that Isabella had left behind. Connie gathered evidence. Marcus quietly contacted neutral shareholders, building a new majority. Ethan stepped into the media spotlight, calm, deliberate. His message was simple, yet sharp. Gentera must rebuild, not just genetics, but integrity. Logan struck back swiftly. He held a press conference, blaming misinformation and internal confusion. Scarlett stood beside him, silent, eyes cold as glass, neither defending nor denying. Ethan watched the footage, and for the first time, felt no pain, only a quiet exhaustion. He knew now the love he'd once shared with Scarlett had died. The day Isabella nearly did. Night, an empty office. The city outside burned bright, a maze of artificial stars. Ethan opened the small leather pouch from the forest. Inside was the agate pendant he once gave Isabella. She had returned it to Kino before Ethan left, saying, "He needs it more than I do." His fist tightened around it. "If you truly believe in me, don't just go back for me. Go back for justice." But he knew the real reason he dove into this war was the aching pull of missing someone he couldn't call, couldn't message, couldn't even know if she still thought of him. And it was that very unknowing that made the longing burn deeper. He told no one, but in his heart he made a vow. "I will end this. quickly, clearly, to bring you back. The next morning, Ethan received word. A secret shareholder holding 4% had transferred their shares to him, raising his total to 19%. Enough to propose Logan's temporary removal from the board. An emergency meeting was called. Another battle was about to begin. Ethan straightened his collar and stepped into the elevator. His eyes held a new light, not the gleam of a young, cocky CEO, but the gaze of a man who knew loss, and was now chasing the only thing that still mattered. Something or someone waiting for him, deep in the forest. On the other side of the world, deep within the jungle, Isabella Moore woke to the sound of chirping insects and silver moonlight filtering through a canopy of leaves. Weeks had passed since Ethan left. No news, no signs. Nothing to hold on to except instinct. And it was instinct that made her begin cleaning the hut. Each night, Shu sat by the fire, stitching the torn leather pouch Ethan once used to carry forest medicines. Quietly, she added a lining inside, as if one day he would return and take it with him. The village children would sometimes ask, "Will the city man come back?" She would only smile, but her eyes always drifted toward the slope, the place where he had walked away. She missed him, not with a burning ache, not with torment, but with a slow erosion of breath. Isabella had never stayed close to anyone long enough to feel absence. But Ethan? He was the first to make her think of the word return. Not to a city, but to a person. But she wouldn't allow herself to dream. Not while Logan Dawson still held power. Not while the crimes of 3 years ago remained unanswered. Not while the dead still lacked justice. She clutched the leather pouch and whispered, "Hurry, Ethan, please hurry." The main auditorium of Genterra, morning of the extraordinary shareholder meeting. Gone was the serenity of routine assemblies today. The air smelled of gunpowder. The media had arrived early, reporters from Daily, Health Insider, and iCedar, and 3 national networks were invited under the banner of internal transparency and reform. Scarlett sat in the second row, no longer wearing her white blazer, but a deep burgundy velvet dress, understated, somber. Her face was calm, too calm to be real. Ethan glanced past her. No eyes met. They had gone full circle, and there was nothing left to conceal. Logan Dawson, clad in a dark tailored suit, entered like a general, stern, commanding. He was used to rooms folding beneath his presence. But today, he noticed something different. The chairman's seat no longer bore his name. Instead, Ethan Walker sat at the center. His hand rested lightly on a sealed envelope. His eyes scanned the room like a man who had already seen every reaction before it happened. This meeting, Ethan began slowly, is not for debate. It's for clarity. Because some truths have been buried too long under legalese, equity charts, and carefully staged accidents. A few murmurs broke out. Scarlett crossed her arms, gaze lowered. Logan raised an eyebrow, but remained silent. Ethan continued. 3 years ago, Genterra suspended Project Sierra, citing technological risk. But the real reason was that the lead researcher uncovered serious ethical violations, altered genetic codes, unauthorized trials, and evidence of data theft. That person was Dr. Isabella Moore, co-founder of the project and holder of 12% of its equity. Before she disappeared without reason. A louder ripple now. Some cameras turned. Ethan gave a faint nod. She didn't die. She didn't vanish. She was hunted. But before Isabella walked into the boardroom that morning, there had already been a quiet return. 3 days before the meeting, Ethan, along with a small team of rescuers and legal advisors, set off for the jungle. Once more, no journalists, no press. Just a silent journey with one purpose: to bring Isabella Moore back to the truth. They arrived at the camp just as the sun dipped below the treetops. Isabella was crushing herbs when she saw the silhouette of a familiar figure step through the leaves. She froze, hands stiff on the stone mortar. Ethan said nothing. He only smiled and held out a small bag. "I brought a few things for everyone," he said. A hand-cranked flashlight, some boxes of colored pencils for the kids, and a charcoal water filter. The villagers looked at Ethan like a relative returning after the hunt. Kino wrapped himself around Ethan's leg, just like before. They stayed one night. In the familiar hut. No electric stove, no soft mattress, just two people sitting by a fire, as they had once done before. But tonight felt different. "Tomorrow," Ethan began, eyes fixed on the flames, "will be the first time I walk into a meeting without knowing if I'll win. Not for shares, for justice, and for you." Isabella lowered her gaze, gently peeling a dry leaf between her fingers. You know," she whispered, "every night I'd hear footsteps, thinking maybe you'd come back. But no one ever came." Ethan was silent for a long while. Then he turned and took her hand. "I don't know when I fell in love with you. Maybe it was when you dressed my wound without saying a word, or when you showed me how to roast fish without ever smiling, or maybe, when you told me, 'Don't come back for me, come back for justice.'" He paused, then added slowly, "But today I came back for both." Isabella looked up. Her eyes were red, but no tears fell. She didn't say "me too." She just inched closer, as if after a long and silent dream, two people who had loved each other had finally found each other again. The next morning, they left the camp in the early mist. Isabella wore the simple gray shirt Ethan had brought. Crisp, understated, like the woman herself. The back doors opened. Isabella Moore stepped inside. No one spoke. The clicking of cameras filled the space like summer insects. A woman in a simple gray shirt, hair tied low, no makeup, walked steadily to the front row, as if returning to a classroom podium she once commanded. Scarlett went pale. Logan furrowed his brows for the first time. Isabella stood tall, looking straight ahead. No tremble, no avoidance. "I was the last survivor on duty the day of the so-called accident. I didn't leave the lab by mistake. I was erased. My data wiped. My identity locked out. And since that day, Gentera has never conducted a proper internal investigation." She held up a USB drive. Inside are original emails, raw data, and unaltered reports. Some I took with me that last day. Others were restored with the help of someone who believed me. Her eyes found Ethan's for just a second. But it was enough to tighten something in his chest. Logan stood. "I object. This is a spectacle, not a legal process." Ethan didn't move. "And because internal channels no longer hold trust, I've sent all data to the Federal Health Investigation Agency, along with Dr. Moore's full testimony." Logan looked around, but few faces still sided with him. Where once there was fear, now there was fatigue. "Or at least caution," Isabella added, her voice still steady. "You may deny me, but you cannot deny him." She looked to Ethan. "You didn't come here to rescue me. You came because the truth deserves to be spoken, no matter who loses in the telling." Ethan pressed his lips together. He didn't respond, only nodded. It was both an affirmation and a farewell to the man he once was, the one who believed investment was devoid of emotion. That afternoon, Logan Dawson was officially suspended pending investigation. His company accounts were frozen. The Federal Ethics Committee launched a full inquiry. Scarlett remained in her seat, watching Isabella from afar. Then she left, wordlessly. Ethan didn't stop her. Because the goodbye had already been said through action, not words. When all procedures were complete, Ethan stepped out of the hall into a wall of lenses and questions. But he looked at no one. His eyes searched for one face, only Isabella. Was waiting by the emergency stairwell, the one place untouched by cameras. "It's done," he said. "The hardest part?" She looked at him for the first time, truly. The hardest part was believing someone would come back for the right reasons. "You did." Ethan reached out his hand. "Come back with me." She hesitated a beat, then nodded. No tears, no theatrics. Just two people who had walked through forest, through pain, through silence, and now stood together. In light. After the historic meeting, Genterra was no longer the same company it had been a month ago. The Federal Investigation Bureau launched a full inquiry. Logan Dawson was officially indicted on multiple charges: data manipulation, unethical medical testing, and collusion for personal gain. The company's old PR team scrambled to distort the narrative, but public pressure was overwhelming. Former employees who once stayed silent began to speak up. Longtime shareholders demanded a full audit of all internal processes over the past 5 years. The name, Isabella Moore, once a ghost in the system, now returned as a symbol. She gave no interviews. She appeared on no magazine covers. She only said one sentence during her session with investigators: "I'm not here to reclaim my name. I just don't want anyone else to vanish the way I did." Ethan was nominated as interim chairman. He declined. "Genterra doesn't need a CEO carrying emotional burdens," he told the board. "I came to stop a mistake, not to rule." He sold off most of his shares, retaining just 1%, a way to watch over without being bound. That afternoon, he walked out of the building that had once symbolized his greatest triumph. The sun was soft, the wind gentle. In his hand was only a one-way plane ticket to the edges of the Amazon. Rainforest, the small camp where Isabella had once lived, was still there. Though quieter, the locals knew Ethan now. They nodded at him as if he had never left. The old hut had been tidied. On the table lay a brand-new leather pouch, the one Isabella had stitched by firelight. By hand, by memory, she was at the stream. Just like the first time he saw her, bent over, gathering leaves, her eyes reading each fiber of nature as if reading her own past. Ethan said nothing. He simply sat beside her. "You really came back," she whispered. "For what's right," he replied, "and for what has no name." Isabella turned to him. This time her eyes held no caution, no shadow. Only a quiet stillness shaped by trust, justice. "We'll find its way," she said. "But you left behind an empire, a world that knew your name." "I didn't leave it," Ethan interrupted. "I just chose again." She smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. The days that followed passed slowly. They lived like ordinary people, gathering herbs in the morning, fixing the hut in the afternoon, lighting a fire at night, and sharing the stories they never had time to tell. Ethan spoke of a childhood built on contracts, early boardrooms, and numbers that once felt like friends. Isabella told of her first night in the forest, convinced she would never trust again until someone fell from the sky and insisted on learning how to weave palm leaves. They never named what they had. They didn't need to. Whenever Ethan handed her a piece of string, she never asked what for. She just reached out, took it. Whenever she gave him a handful of dried seeds, he didn't ask why. Atita sate and smiled. And that was enough. One rainy afternoon, they sat together in the bamboo hut, listening to the wind sweeping through the forest like the ancient music of the land. Ethan turned to her. "Do you think we're hiding?" Isabella shook her head. "No. Hiding is when you're afraid of being seen. Here, we live without needing to be seen." Ethan took her hand, this time with no intention of letting go. "Then, stay with me." Isabella didn't answer with words. She leaned her head gently onto his shoulder, and in that moment, there was no more revenge, no more files, no more boundaries between light and shadow, only to people who had once fallen but didn't break, who had once been lost, but had found each other. The forest in October was greener than in any other month. The canopy shimmered like silk, and the rain came gently, as if it were a courteous guest. Birds called to each other at dawn, snakes slept quietly in crevices, and the stream that wound past the small camp whispered like it had never carried anyone's sorrow. Ethan built a new bamboo hut beside the old one. He called it his workspace, but in truth, it was simply where he wrote not shareholder reports, not keynote speeches, but a book. Light in the Deep Forest, a story about a woman who was erased, a man who fell, and a love. Without phones, flowers, or even a confession. Only fire, 2 hands, and a bowl of spring water left on the doorstep by one for the other. The locals adored them. The children called Ethan the storyteller foreigner, while Isabella returned to her truest self, a healer using knowledge, patience, and eyes that no longer burned with fury. Each day they lived as if no other world existed beyond this forest, but the world still turned, and one day, 2 years after that fateful meeting, it came knocking. The first letter arrived through a representative of the World Health Union, an invitation for Isabella to lead a project developing plant-based pharmaceuticals, blending Western medicine and indigenous knowledge. Something she uniquely embodied. Soon after came offers from Ethan's former subsidiaries, branches now focused on sustainable tech, education, and community health. They needed a coordinator, someone with vision, integrity, and the courage to live in the wild for 2 years without ever running away. Ethan and Isabella sat beneath the great banyan tree. Reading the letters together, we could say no. Ethan said, "I don't miss the titles, and I certainly don't miss the roles. All I need is you and this forest." Isabella was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. "But if we can carry a piece of the forest out into the world, why shouldn't we?" A few months later, they returned to the city, not to become who they were, but to take the lead, this time not in battle, but in building. Isabella opened a center for applied medicinal research, a place where medical students do fieldwork in forest regions. Ethan managed a community development fund, supporting independent scientists and social engineers. Each had their own office, but every noon they shared lunch together. In quiet moments, they read side by side. And when they grew tired, they planned what could never be missing, their regular retreat back to the forest. The place where they had found each other, they held a wedding. A small one, no stage, no fireworks, just a warm gathering in the garden behind the research center, with a few close friends, locals from the village. And a wildflower planted in the center of the aisle. The old agate pendant became a wedding ring, no cutting, no engraving, because their names were already etched into a memory no metal could match. Once, during a seminar, a young student asked Isabella, "What helped you survive those 3 lost years and come back?" She simply smiled, then turned to Ethan and said, "Because I knew someone still believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Their story never made the front page. There was no TV series, but for those who read Light in the Deep Forest, they knew there is a kind of love that needs no display, a kind of justice that needs no vengeance. It's a kind of person who, when they live true, turns every place they go into home, and so, after everything, to people who had once fallen, not just from the sky, but from the world they used to trust, found their way back to each other. No wedding dress, no stage, just a piece of agate, a bamboo hut, and a whisper. So soft, we're not hiding. We're simply choosing a way to live, without needing to be seen. Light in the Deep Forest is not a fairy tale romance. It's a reminder that sometimes the ones who've lost the most are also the ones who live the truest, love the longest, and deserve the gentlest new beginnings. If you saw a part of yourself in this story, or if you simply want to leave a word for Ethan, for Isabella, or for your own heart, leave us a comment below. We read every single one, and we treasure every feeling you share. See you again in the next story, one that's quiet, deep, and deeply human.